Good morning, Shorter. I'm excited for your spring break coming up. I remember those days, so they're always a lot of fun. So thankful for the music this morning, for the sweet prayer, for this invitation. And I want to share a bit of a story with you today, and it's a true story. So we'll start with that. I will share one embarrassing story. Last time I spoke at Shorter, I came over to give the commencement address, and I spilled coffee creamer all down my suit before I got here. And there's not a dry cleaner between here and Canton that can do 1 hour cleaning, so I had to come very humbly, and I do recall that. So I skipped coffee this morning on the way over here. Let me tell this story, and this is something that happened to me, and I'm going to share it in a way that I think and I hope that relates to you, because this is something that happened to me last summer. And I believe it has a story. The Lord's placed this on my heart for quite a while to share with you, perhaps even before I knew I was coming to speak to you today. And I hope it's something you can relate to. So it goes back to Sunday, July 15th of last year. And it was an ordinary Sunday. We had a leisurely breakfast. I go to church, and we start preparing for the coming week. It was a hot, heart of the summer day. As the day evolved into a murky evening, our youngest son had called. He was a Shorter attendee a number of years ago. And he was returning from his weekend duty as a National Guardsman, and he just learned about an impending deployment to Afghanistan. That had been rumored for months, but he would leave sometime in the fall, which he did, to go to one of the most dangerous places on earth. That news hovered over our home that Sunday afternoon, and it was almost like a battle in our home between the upcoming night and the waning daylight. When I'm troubled, first I often pray, but the second thing I do is clean things. So I start organizing things around my house, and so that night I was cleaning carpets, I was getting dry cleaning ready. It was just my way of coping. I think we all have those methods. But I had another call that followed after that. It was my brother who called and said, there's a lot of law enforcement around our mother's home. My mother passed away a couple of years ago, and we wondered what was going on. I said, I ain't got a clue. I don't know. Serving as a magistrate judge, sometimes I receive calls from the county because I sign arrest warrants and different matters that come before the court. But I had another call that came in from county government. It came on our landline into our home, which, believe it or not, we still have one, and I wonder why in the world we still do, because we seldom answer it. It's usually those callers that want to sell you something. But I did listen. I heard a recorded message that told about a missing child in the community, that one that was 2 years old that was missing, and it was very near, in fact, next door to my mom's house. My mom's house was being remodeled at the time, so she had a swimming pool in the backyard. And I thought, the first thing I thought is that swimming pool is wide open, and there's a 2-year-old roaming about in the community. And so that panicked me, and it was like a call that came out in my heart to go, push, get out the door. And it was like, go, go, go. And I rushed from my home. It's not far away. I live probably a quarter mile away. But I was very scared at what I would find. In that hot evening, I was hearing God's call, and I arrived at my mom's house, and the first thing I heard was screaming of a child in the back where the pool was at. Running to that, I soon saw the child in the deepest part of the pool, floating on his back. The pool was neglected because it was being remodeled just like the house was at the time. I looked around. There were law enforcement all through the woods with flashlights because the evening had come at that point. I yelled for help, but nobody was coming. They couldn't hear me. And I realized then that I had to enter the deep part of that pool to save that child. He was in the absolute worst place he could be, in the pool. But I will say the waters around him appeared to be troubled. I wish I had a video of what I saw that day. It was like the water was boiling around him. It makes my hair stand up to tell that story, because it was a fascinating thing to see. But I also didn't have a lot of time to look either. But it was absolutely one of the most amazing things I've seen. It was almost like God's hand was holding that child up. I want you to think about that. Sometimes we're in the deep part of the pool and you are held up. And I think that child was certainly that way. Some credited his diaper but I don't think that's what was going on. I entered the pool very gently, so I didn't want to scare the child, and I didn't want to be, I'm an old guy, I didn't want to dive in too rapidly either, because that could be dangerous for both of us. But I couldn't reach the child. I stood at the edge of the pool holding on, hoping I could reach out or maybe swim out in a moment. In just a moment, it was like the wind blew the child's feet toward me, and I was able to grab the child. And I pulled him to my breast. We went to the shore. My wife took him out of the water. But I did look at him just before he was removed from the water, and I looked at him. I said, "I got you, baby. It's okay." And in a moment, it was pandemonium. The law enforcement officials, EMTs, were all around. He was carried to an ambulance, 2 years old, wet, scared, and I was wet and scared too. Climbed from the pool, shaking. News reports that night just simply said the child was safe. He'd been found. The search had been concluded with a good outcome. And I had difficulty sleeping that night, because you think about the risks that child faced and what could have gone wrong, because he could have been at the bottom of a murky pool at that time. So sleepless nights, uncertainty. And I just imagine what had gone wrong. The same week I learned my brother was diagnosed with cancer, and we've always been a close family. By midweek, the sheriff's office had released a press report that indicated what had actually happened, the details of that event. And within 15 minutes, I had every Atlanta newspaper and television station at my doorstep, knocking at my home door, knocking at my office door. And, of course, we were lead story that evening. I always worry when you get interviewed that you're going to say something wrong. And I'm worried all night, did I say anything wrong? We're in an environment we have to really watch what we say. But that night, after all those interviews, after watching the television reports, I considered my brother's health and my son's deployment. I just went out in the night and prayed to the Lord, what just happened? Does this happen so rapidly? What's going on? I think many of us are asking that same question in this environment today, from politics to social issues. What just happened? What's going on, and why does this occur? Your generation is facing that like none other before. What does all this mean to you? Many of you stand on the precipice of your careers, starting families, and these uncertainties may just seem overwhelming. And I want to encourage you today. Murky, troubled waters have been around on every hand before. You're not the first ones to experience it, and you're not going to be abandoned by the Lord either. So I want you to know that. But there are good stories throughout the ages, and there's some in the Bible that deal with these type events, and particularly with young people, and a few old people like me too. So I want you to hear a story today that is one of my favorites. It's in the book of Esther. It's probably not one that you read a great deal, but it's a great story. It's the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention anything about God. There's no reference to God in the whole book. And so she was raised, Esther was this beautiful young Jewish woman who lived in captivity. She was raised by her wise and brave relative Mordecai. And if you read the story, you'll find out that the king, and I don't know if any of you watched 300, that movie years ago about the battle that happened in the Genesis of Greece. So it has a little connection to that story if you want to get into history nerd things. But that is the background for the king. The king had dismissed his wife, and he was hunting a new wife, and he was looking for the most beautiful young ladies he could find in that land. And Esther comes to the top of the heap. She's chosen to be queen. Mordecai was an interesting guy. He had on more than one occasion discovered palace intrigue that jeopardized the king and later his fellow captive Jewish nation. He had offended someone named Haman, and Haman wanted to kill them all. So Esther had unique access to the king to expose the plot, but to approach the king without being summoned could have cost her life. And here's what I want you to hear. Mordecai reminded her, if you want to look at this in chapter 4, verse 14, Mordecai reminded her, because of her position and where she was at, that she was prepared for such a time as this. Esther had a response to that. She's in a position of power, of influence, and she knows that what she had to do could jeopardize her life. And she resigned to approach the king because it meant saving her people. And she said, if I perish, I perish. And I think that's a chilling reminder to us today of what it takes sometimes to follow what our calling and what we're supposed to do in life. She was willing and sacrificial. She was aware of her destiny. She was aware of why she's there. So this beautiful young queen would ultimately save her people. Had she not done so, I'm going to release something very peculiar to you today. You might not be here today. Because without that Jewish nation existing, where would Christ come from? And Mordecai reminded her, if you don't do it, God's going to raise somebody else up, because it was an important part of their history and our history. But there are points in the Bible and points in our lives and points in our nation that your existence and your role are absolutely critical. And you need to know those times and be responsive to them when they happen. I promise you, you will have a role to play. Our actions and our callings have profound consequences. And I'm going to relay that God has prepared you for such a time as this in a troubled world that needs you. We very much need you. And I don't know how many people are telling you that. You're a generation that has to make a difference. You're as important as Esther was in that time to help us change. There's so many people just barely floating above the surface that are lost, that need your help and need your guidance to salvation. Before the incident with the child, I was struggling with something myself. I'm getting older. I wish I were your age, but I'm not. And you wonder when you get older, and this is something I want you to think about when you get older, what have I done? Where am I going? What did I just do? And you may wonder that after spring break. I don't know. There may be a question about that. I hope not. But I was really struggling. And after that event, I realized something somewhat like Esther, that for my entire existence might have been to save a child, that I have no idea what we'll do when he's older. Now, I've done some pretty cool things during my life, and I've had a wonderful, blessed life, but what if that's the reason I existed? It may be that simple. I doubt it, but you have times in your life you're there for a reason and a purpose. Let me share what I believe is very important for your generation to hear, because, again, I think you're prepared for such a time as this. Our nation needs you. We need you to lead us to reform. There's not been a significant reform in the world since Martin Luther, over 500 years ago. We are overdue for reform, and I think you're the instrument of that change. Your generation has criticized a lot, but your generation despises dysfunctionality, and we need you to despise dysfunctionality. We need you to come forward and do what's supposed to be done to lead us back to reform. Opposition will seek to challenge you and destroy you. Now, understand that. It's almost like Queen Esther. It is a dangerous place to go. Every institution in our existence at this time needs reform. You may say that's a harsh thing to say, but after so long, we all need it. It's almost like we need a shower for the world right now. It's just a time that we need that refreshing. Undertaking reform can be dangerous to your reputation, your careers, your relationships. In some cases, you might even jeopardize your life. And you have to ask, almost like Queen Esther, why are you here? Are you willing to accept God's calling even though you might perish? There are some causes worth dying for, and I want you to hear this. There are some things worth dying for. The banner of Christ is one. Your freedom is another. Your faith, family, and those that can't help themselves. Those are worth dying for. Earlier this week, I had a client. He was a missionary to the country of Moldova, and I don't know how much you know about that country. I tried to learn a little bit more after we talked. He goes to orphanages in that country. This is a former Soviet bloc country, and it is a hellhole. I don't know any other way to describe it. Poverty, no real economic activity, and those orphanages are overrunning with children abandoned by parents that were either too poor to raise them or too poor to be parents. He mentioned young ladies are that were in the orphanages that were blinded because of the violence of their parents, throwing them against the wall. He mentioned a group of young people that went out on a field trip with a school event, and they were delayed. Nobody could find them. They came back missing one kidney because they're harvesting organs from children in that country. There's no law to stop that, and there's tremendous money from Turkish mafia and others that are coming forth there. Children will be exposed when they're released from those orphanages because no one's minding the store at age 15 to either sex trafficking or slavery, or they're lined up and harvested for body parts that are sold on the black market. That's a world we can live in without reform. And I hope you're challenged to say that's not acceptable. There are predators seeking you as well, so don't think that's not the case. They're spreading division in forms of belief in economic models that have historically ended in collapse and misery. And you're seeing that example in Moldova. That's a prime example. Don't become a victim to those calling you a victim. You're not a victim. You're in the most blessed place on the face of this planet, in a safe place with parents that care enough to send you to college. You're not a victim. And don't buy that. And I know that's somewhat radical. I know we've all been through something. We've all had difficulties, but you are not a victim. Don't let that paralyze you with those injections of anger and division and self-pity. Don't let anybody divide you on economic, racial, gender, religious classifications. You know what? We're all equal in the eyes of God. When did it become revolutionary to claim equal means equal? And we're at a time that's a radical thought. And I'm not wanting to offend anybody, but when you are benefited by a preference, and I don't care for what reason, you are being insulted and condescended to. You can stand on your own. You are worthy of whatever you can undertake. Don't let somebody make you a victim or place you in a position that you're having to accept something that makes you above someone else. That's not necessary. You're good enough and strong enough to do that. When did it become radical to think that self-sufficiency is preferable to dependency? When did it become wrong to believe God is our provider, not government? Those seeking power wish to make you classes, victims, and dependents for their benefit, not yours. Don't fall for it. Think for yourselves. I'm going to challenge you to become critical thinkers, and don't be afraid of your conclusions. Be brave, be bold. You can do that. My wife found a poem last night, and I'm not much on reading poems. There's probably somebody much better at reading this. This is an anonymous source, and it talks about men, but I'm going to include you young ladies in this as well. So this is not, I understand this was probably written a number of years ago, but I want you to listen to it. God, give us men, and I'm going to say women too, a time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men and women who the lust of office do not kill. Men and women who the spoils of office cannot buy. Men and women who possess opinions and a will. Men and women who have an honor. Men and women who will not lie. Men and women who will not stand before, or who will stand before a demagogue and scorn his treacherous flatteries without winking. Tall men and women, sun-crowned, who live above the fog in public duty and in private thinking. If you're a follower of Christ, I challenge you to listen to the guidance and the urgings of the Holy Spirit. And we don't talk about that a lot today. I hope it's something that you consider. But as a Christ follower, you have something in you that guides you and strengthens you and will call you when a child's drowning and when a nation's drowning. Listen, there's great joy there too. You can know your calling. You can know your reason for being here. And if you perish in service to the Lord and freedom, you know what? There's a lot of saints and patriots that have gone before you that we honor to this day. They're considered something very, very special. We need you. God is calling you. Some of you are hearing what I've just talked about, and you're hearing, go, go, go. And that's a good thing. You were prepared for such a time as this. the most amazing prayer you can ask, and I'm going to challenge you to do this, is not what God can do for you, but what can I do for you, Lord? It's a scary prayer, but you can ask that, and I encourage you to do so. In my prayer a few days after the rescue event, I wondered and prayed, what just happened? I don't like media attention. I worried about my son and my brothers, I mentioned earlier, in an answer that made me smile. And I'm standing out in a starlit night in the summer, and you know when the Lord speaks to you. You know what he said? I got you, baby. Same words I mentioned to that child. He's got you, babies. He won't leave you. He will never depart from you. And I'm going to ask you to something higher, to rise above the mire of politics and our confusing era to serve in this time. And I'm going to ask you to be prepared, to be willing, and to respond. The road less traveled is sometimes lonely, but guess who's with you on that road? Creator of the universe. You will never be alone. He's closer than a brother. I want to thank you for letting me come today, and I appreciate your attention. You're an amazing group, so thank you for being here today. You didn't have to be here, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And God bless you all.